Hello, ladies and gentlemen, it's the Historical Gamer once again, and today I am returning to Civil War Generals 2. This is footage that was taken from a live stream from several months ago. This is the fourth video looking at the Battle of Shiloh. It is the last video looking at the Battle of Shiloh. And I am going to be showing you the remainder of that battle that was fought out in that live stream some months ago. What I will say is the majority of this video is going to be a fresh audio recording. I know some of you have complained at points in the past when I talk over something that was actually a live stream. In this case, the last part of the battle was really being fought out at like 3 or 4 in the morning. I was not talking much. I was exhausted, and I probably shouldn't have been playing. So there's not much you're going to be missing out on by having me do the voiceover for the audio. So just keep that in mind. If it's not something you like, I apologize, but I'm not very pleased with the audio as it is if I just leave it as is. So I'm going to talk over it, and maybe toward the end of the battle when I start talking a little bit more about some of the post-battle stuff, I may bring the audio back from the stream, but I won't really advise you of it. So as I've already said, this is part 4 of a live stream from Civil War Generals 2, playing the Battle of Shiloh in the Grand Campaign. In the first day of first part of the series, I absorbed the bulk of the Confederate attack. In the second part, there was kind of a brief interlude of, Confederate attack, Union attack, no one really gaining any clear advantage. And then in the third part, the last video, I really started to gain the upper hand. I smashed, you can see on the map here, I smashed the Confederate left flank at the end of April 6th and early April 7th as Don Carlos Buell's army arrived on the field, and I have begun the process of breaking the Confederate right in an attempt to recreate the Battle of Cannae, and I'm sure I'm butchering that pronunciation, but the famous victory by the Empire of Carthage under the leadership of Hannibal. Where he broke both flanks of the Roman army and defeated them. That's sort of around the time of the Civil War, every single general was always trying to strive for that double envelopment, that historical crushing of both flanks and destruction of the army, and no one ever really accomplished it. The same could be said of World War I. It was sort of this glory, this tactical dream that, the perfect general would be able to accomplish. And I don't even think Napoleon ever really accomplished it, at least not to that extent. Austerlitz was a uniquely supreme victory, but it was no Cannae. And I'm sure I'm butchering that pronunciation. But anyway, as I was saying, we are in the process of fighting the Battle of Shiloh toward its conclusion. We have successfully broken the Confederate left and are kind of in and amongst the ranks. The Confederate right is weak and being overwhelmed, and the Confederate center is slowly being pushed back as well. This is day 2 of the Battle of Shiloh. The battle started on April 6th and has moved into April 7th. The Union now have clear superiority in terms of manpower ready for fight, and the Confederates really have no hope on an attack level. Their best hope is to probably withdraw and form some sort of strong defensive position. However, that seems unlikely that they will accomplish this. Now, Shiloh was an interesting battle, and I think I've talked about this a little bit in previous videos, but not to a tremendous extent. Shiloh was an interesting battle. As we kind of go through the recap of this fight, I think it's important to remember the significance of the Battle of Shiloh. So we think about the Civil War in the early days, and we think about some of the fights at, Wilson's Creek. We think about the Battle of Bull Run, but rarely does it seem we focus too much on Shiloh, when perhaps we should. Shiloh was really the first of the epic battles of the Civil War. It was the first of those massive casualty events. Bull Run was something like 7,000 total casualties between both sides. Certainly not nothing. It was, bloodier than any of the Revolutionary War battles, but it wasn't the traditional Civil War fight where, just masses of men were slaughtered. It was more in the veins of an old-time battle, in terms of the American continent. Maybe something that wouldn't be too out of place for an epic fight, during the Mexican-American War in terms of casualty figures based on men engaged, although even then it was still far more bloody. But Shiloh was the first of these epic, all-encompassing battles. The Battle of Shiloh ended up seeing some 60,000 Union effectives and some 44,000 Confederate effectives engaged. Between those forces, 13,000 Union troops and 11,000 Confederates became casualties, some 24,000 men. If Bull Run was the bloodiest battle in American history, Shiloh put it to shame just a few short months later. Bull Run was fought in the summer of 1861. Shiloh was fought in the spring of 1862, the year that would seemingly never end, with tragedies and bloodbaths like Shiloh, Antietam, Second Manassas, Fredericksburg, the entire Peninsula Campaign, where Robert E. Lee lost a quarter of his army, and victory, the way it was described. And the Union lost another 16,000 men, all in the span of about a week. It was just this horrible slugfest that went on and went on and went on. And even when it seemed like the campaign season was over in the winter of 1862, yet another bloodbath would occur on the ridges outside Fredericksburg in Virginia. 1862 was sort of the pre-1864, if you will. 63, I would say, was more defined by large unit actions in the east and the steady progress by Grant in the west. 63 didn't quite have the same level of ferocity. It had the most famous battle at the Battle of Gettysburg, and then it had the Confederacy's greatest victory, arguably, at the Battle of Chancellorsville. It also had some other large engagements like the Battle of Chickamauga, which was another very large engagement. But 63 to me seemed to be more of a handful of gigantic actions and then steady, although somewhat less bloody, progress made by General Grant in the Western Theater. I may be misreading this completely and reading what I want to see, but to me, 62 was the year of the constant bloodbath, where there was seemingly a major battle fought every other day, whereas 63 was, that was 62, and 63 was more of a, traditional, wait 4 months, fight a huge battle, wait 2 months, fight a huge battle, wait 3 months while you recover, fight a huge battle. And that might also be defined by Meade's sluggish reaction to Gettysburg. But 62 was almost the precursor to 64. And what I mean by that is 62 was this, the Union lands on the peninsula, steady march up toward Richmond, and then a ferocious string of battles, 7 days of fighting at the Peninsula Campaign. Battle, fight after fight, death after death. And then you still end up having the Confederate counterstroke at Second Manassas. You have the Confederate campaign in the Valley. You have the Battle of Antietam, and then later the Battle of Fredericksburg being fought even in the winter when traditionally armies are at quarters and not doing much. Whereas, 63 didn't have a winter campaign per se in the East. The Western Theater was largely dominated by Grant with a few bloody repulses around Vicksburg, but for the most part, it was a season lacking in much in the way of large battle. I believe Stone's River occurred in 63, and then you also have Chickamauga. But the armies were relatively at rest. In the Western Theater in 62, you had Shiloh, one of the bloodiest battles, maybe the bloodiest battle in the entire Western Theater during the war. You have Perryville, which is almost a Bull Run type battle in Kentucky. And then you also have the beginnings of the Vicksburg campaign in 62 as well. So, in addition to the battles of Fort Donaldson and Fort Henry, which were far less bloody, although Donaldson was certainly disastrous for the Confederacy. 63 in the West, wasn't quite as bloody, but it was far more momentous. But 64 was really the pinnacle of bloodletting in the American Civil War, where Grant takes over, and much in the vein of the Peninsula Campaign, where Lee just keeps attacking and attacking and attacking the Union Army despite constantly being defeated. Grant takes over that role from Lee. Grant goes in and says, I'm just going to keep attacking Robert E. Lee, and over the course of something like a month, the Union Army loses more than 60,000 men and fights battles every single day for 20-plus days. Again, 62 was almost this, this is really, really bad, and this war is horrific, but you wait, because things are going to get even worse. And Shiloh was the beginning of that. It wasn't the first battle in 62. You had the Battle of Fort Henry, when the Union basically demolished an underwater fort. You had the Battle of Fort Donaldson, where inept Confederate planning and inept Confederate leadership led to the needless surrender of some 17,000 Confederate soldiers by a almost equal Union force, a slightly larger Union force, and that opened the way into the South, led directly to the fall of Nashville, and led directly to the Battle of Shiloh. So when Fort Donaldson falls and the Confederacy more or less loses Nashville and Tennessee for the most part as a result of Fort Donaldson falling, the Confederates panic and they realize, oh crap, we've got to respond to this. The gateway to the heart of the Confederacy is open. Rivers fall into Union control that allows them to raid gunboats as far south as Alabama, or was it Georgia? Might have been Georgia. Anyway, there's this panic. So the Confederates muster one of the most powerful armies they will in the entire history of the war in the West, and they launch an attack on Grant at Shiloh. Grant is initially caught off guard. His some 30,000 men are outnumbered by more than 15,000 Confederates who come on and nearly rout him, but he's able to hold on. And then General Buell's army arrives, a second Union army arrives to, help save the day then the second day and allow the Confederacy to be defeated soundly. It saw the fall of the most highly touted, although maybe, certainly didn't accomplish a ton during the war because he died so early, but the most highly touted Confederate general falls in Albert Sidney Johnston, the hero of the Confederacy. And then that mantle shifts to General Lee as he begins to take over later that year in 62 in the East. So Shiloh was really this sort of precursor of, initial Confederate attack, and then Grant, takes it on the chin, but then quickly responds and counterattacks. It was the first of these epic multi-day long battles that saw the death and maiming of more than 20,000 soldiers on both sides. And it was in many ways, like I said, the precursor to later battles. And not the opening shot in 62, because you've got Pea Ridge, which occurred earlier in 62 as well, further west. You had Glorietta also, which occurred in 62. So it wasn't the first battle or even major battle. Pea Ridge saw about 3,000 casualties, but it was the first of these epics with more than 100,000 total men engaged. And I think it's an important battle that we don't give enough attention to, because really, if Shiloh goes a different way and Grant's forced to withdraw, who knows what happens to him? His reputation was dodgy enough. He was viewed as a drinker. He was viewed not positively. He was involved in many political snuffles and quibbles. If Grant's driven back, perhaps Buell becomes the key figure in the war in the West. And then, who knows what happens to Grant and what happens to the rest of the war if Grant doesn't end up leading Union forces. Grant's campaigns at Vicksburg were absolutely brilliant, and I don't think, he's often portrayed as this butcher, but he had tremendous success during the Vicksburg campaign in very innovative and clever ways of fighting. He wasn't viewed as the butcher until he had the manpower to act as the butcher, until he was able to grind the Confederacy down, and those were not his tactics in the West. It also saw, with the rise of Grant, it ensured the rise of Sherman, a close friend and confidant of Grant who had his trust and would increasingly be put in more and more important positions, leading to his eventual rise and the death of Atlanta. People forget about Sherman's drive on Atlanta, but it was constant flanking maneuver after flanking maneuver and relatively costless compared to Grant's fighting in the East. Successfully drove the Confederates out of their positions to, the gates of Atlanta. If his skillful hand hadn't been in charge of the Union Army, if it had been more cautious hands, like Rosecrans or like Buell, who knows what would have occurred? Who knows how the war would have developed differently? Shiloh was the beginning of this very different narrative coming out of the war than otherwise would have come. And it was the great victory and crushing of the Confederate attack that really catapulted these figures, if not immediately apparent, into stardom, success, and survival for the Union. Meanwhile, as I've been blabbering on for the last 15 minutes, you can see here that we have definitely crushed both the right and left flanks of the Confederacy. We've driven the Confederate forces back into this narrow eye-like shape from which many of their forces cannot retreat and are being forced to surrender. We haven't completely closed the gap in or the line in behind them. We're trying to do that right now, but we have certainly successfully ravaged this army to a point where there is almost no chance they will be able to survive, and we may be able to bag the vast majority of the army if some of the units are going to escape, but it seems likely that we will capture quite a few of the Confederate forces involved here as we try and sweep in behind and bag these rather large Confederate brigades. I think I've mentioned it in previous videos with Civil War generals, but one of the things I do find slightly bothersome is the fact that when you capture enemy units, it doesn't seem like there's a true way to prevent these units from reorganizing and re-existing in a future battle. You know, if a unit existed in one battle, it's going to exist in the next. Casualties like death and wounds do seem to carry over to some extent. Units definitely get smaller with time, and it doesn't seem like it's perfectly scripted that a certain number of men will always be available in certain battles. And based on my digging through the battle editor, there certainly seems to be a carryover mechanic for things like casualties, but not with regards to captured or deserted, where the entire unit's destroyed, but more along the lines of just being relevant for things like killed and wounded troopers. It makes me wonder if you're not better off not surrounding an enemy, but just continually battering him and battering him and battering him and trying to continue to inflict as many casualties as possible. If you're talking about one of these grand campaigns that goes on and on for the entire war, that you might be benefited more by trying that kind of an approach. As you can see here, we've used our units on the flank and haven't been able to fully surround the remnants of the Confederate force. There's still one avenue for retreat, so we'll see if they try and break out or escape out that route. It does look like they just routed one of our regiments in a counterattack there to open some semblance of a line toward the rear, but they actually didn't escape any troops out the gap there. You can see they pushed one of our units back, but they didn't allow anyone to fully escape. So we just need to focus on closing that gap, hopefully. If we launch this one Union unit, maybe we can surround what's left. We'll bombard this cavalry first and see what happens here if we attack. We'll move some infantry in and... Okay, so we just routed the enemy with artillery fire. Not exactly what I wanted to do. And in fact, I actually just accidentally left one rebel unit in what I could have surrounded if I had moved more intelligently. There was one more unit, that with the star there in the bottom right, could have been attacked instead, and maybe pushed back into the pocket. But as it is, Confederate headquarters and some 4 regiments of infantry and 1 of artillery are all now surrounded by us, and hopefully we can force their surrender. We just forced the surrender of a Confederate Corps commander with that last attack, and over the next few turns we'll go ahead and reduce, maybe not even a few turns, we'll go ahead and attempt to reduce the entirety of this Confederate pocket here. Looks like the infantry surrendered there, but somehow the artillery decided, no, we're going to keep fighting, so that's interesting. But surely the entire force will be surrounded and destroyed within due course. So while we're waiting for this to play out, I think I'll talk what I'm going to do with the remainder of this series. I haven't fought through the entire series yet, so just keep that in mind. I've only fought through the Battle of, I believe, Mechanicsville, the first of the Peninsula Campaign battles. So I do end up winning, the Battle of Shiloh, if you can't tell already. I do end up picking to go to the fight at the 7 Days battles, and then I fight out the Seven Pines clash between Joseph E. Johnston and General McClellan, and then the Battle of Mechanicsville between Lee and McClellan. And in those fights, those are all part of the live stream, but I think what my intent is to do for the next 2 battles that will follow Shiloh is I think what I will do is I will provide a historical narration of what occurred at the battle while the fighting occurs. I know that's not the preference that some of you have given, but that's my intent. And then I will return to live streaming Civil War Generals 2 on the channel, and I will post ahead of time the hours that I'm going to actually live stream. So if you want, then you can hear the live stream as it occurs. If you aren't able to make it, then the video will still be posted, because I do stream at kind of odd hours. But the video will still be posted in that case. It will just not be posted with necessarily. It'll depend on the video. If I think I did a good job during the live stream and talked well and, carried on an engaging and intelligent conversation, I may provide that audio, but otherwise you may just not get the audio from the stream. I think that's my intention. Now that I've destroyed the bulk of the Confederate Army here, I don't intend to do too much in the way of just posting live stream clips with straight raw footage from the stream, because frankly, I'm bad at it. I'm not good at live streaming. I enjoy streaming. I love kind of interacting with everybody as I stream, but I am not good at it, and I have no imagination of anything other than the fact that I'm terrible at it at this point in time. But hey, it takes time to get good at something sometimes, and I'm just not naturally good at live streaming, so it's something that'll take me some time to adjust to. But as you can see here, this battle is all but won. There's a few Confederate forces that are remaining, but for the most part, they're all dead and gone. I did want to comment one other thing. This has kind of turned into a random commentary now at this point that we're 20 minutes in. But I did see a couple comments in my video. My channel's been kind of all over the board with my recent review of Designated Survivor. I just want to reiterate that the intent of my channel is to focus more on historical topics, as you might guess from my name, The Historical Gamer. That doesn't limit me to historical video games necessarily, so I think one thing that I enjoy doing and have been doing for a while, and they seem to be generally well received, is book reviews. Typically they're historical book reviews or like hypothetical fiction history book reviews, like where you're looking at a hypothetical war. Right now I'm actually reading Team Yankee, which is a tank World War III book. So, those kind of reviews I think will continue. I may post an occasional sci-fi review if it feels kind of like a techno-thriller type thing that's common in the world of history. But for the most part, those book reviews occur. I won't do too much on TV. Maybe I'll touch an episode here or there of Designated Survivor because I really feel like it appeals to the niche of the people who watch this channel. I think those kind of stories, that kind of political thriller, those kind of history-like shows are interesting to people who watch my channel. They're certainly interesting to me, so I'll occasionally cover that, but the focus of the channel is going to remain the occasional book review here and there, although I haven't been making as many videos as I would like, so that has been a larger percentage of my channel than I would prefer over the long term. And then continuing looking at video games of a historical topic or a historical nature. That could be anything from a sports game where I simulate a historic season to more often the case historical games in the vein of war games of conflicts that happened or conflicts that might have happened. And then the only other piece that will be consisting of in this channel that I'm aware of is going to be the podcast, the Single Malt Strategy podcast, which episode 3 just came out a few days ago. I'll link it in the description if you want to check it out. You can also check it out on iTunes. Feel free to leave comments and reviews. I certainly would appreciate that. But the Single Malt Strategy podcast, which will follow all those same, caveats that I just described for the channel, except it's a podcast between myself and Jean Marciniak, the strategy wargamer, in which we talk about these items without the benefit of video game footage in the background. But that's kind of going to be the direction and focus of the channel going forward as I wrap this victory up. And if you have any thoughts or comments on it, please don't hesitate to post something in here. But that's my intention, and I don't envision changing that. So anyway, just to let you guys know. I do have a couple games that are coming out soon that I would like to cover, so I still haven't touched, I think it was Quatre Bras by Scourge of War, which I was actually a tester on, so I do want to cover that. In addition to that, I'd like to cover Cossacks in a little bit more depth. I am going to return, as I've already mentioned, to Civil War Generals 2, maybe get some Sid Meier's Gettysburg, although there have been some technical requirements and restrictions that have been preventing me from getting as into that as I would like. But some, continuing Civil War Generals 2, returning to Scourge of War on some level, continuing or expanding and looking at Cossacks 3, which I had an initial impressions video, but I'd like to dive in a little bit more depth, and maybe a historical series here or there about World War II as we kind of come up on the 75th anniversary of the Pacific War starting for the United States, mixing that in with maybe things like War in the Pacific. In addition to that, I think I'm going to have a series on Stellaris. I did a live stream with it. I don't think, I had an initial impressions video posted with it. I may use the footage for my Seven Eves review, which was a sci-fi book I recently read. But I think I'm going to do something with Stellaris as well. It certainly is a strategy game. It's not historical, obviously, but I want to try and craft sort of a after-action review that's almost like a historical documentary as I play through the game. I don't know if that means I'll chop clips up and just show key moments, or if it'll be like an actual, narration through the entire series. I'm not sure how that'll work. That's probably about a month out, though. I'm waiting for the new patch to come out because saves aren't compatible between versions. So once that does come out, then I will go ahead and, incorporate that into my channel with a series covering that. That's my intention anyway. With all of that being said, this feels like I've been kind of stretching things out. I've had a traditional Civil War discussion at the start of this video, and then I've just been kind of rambling for the last 10 minutes or so. So I hope that's been mildly entertaining. We're into the last moments of this video, and I'm actually going to turn it back over to the live stream so you can hear the live stream audio as I kind of went through the final moments of the battle. And, at that point, it may seem a little disjuncted, but the remainder of the commentary in this video for the next 8 or so minutes, with the exception of the closing, will be direct from the live stream, which occurred back in August, I believe it was, when I had a couple days in a row and I just kept playing this game nonstop. Thanks for listening thus far, and continue to listen through the stream coverage if that was what you originally would have preferred to hear. You'll get a few minutes of it here now. So thanks for listening, guys. I probably could have claimed victory, actually. Smoke is cleared, General. Yes, I do want to say the THG. Obviously, Grant here on the Tennessee River or something. A major victory for the Union player. So the battle didn't end as bloody as historically from a wounded or killed perspective. I can't do math here, about 11,000 Confederate killed or wounded, about 9,000 Union, so a heavy toll, but certainly not quite as bloody. However, look at down here. Nearly 20,000 rebel troops surrendered. So the rebel army going into Shiloh, I want to say, was about 40,000 men. They lost 3/4 of it. That being said, we lost 2/3 of our army at Bull Run in the previous battle, so let's not gloat too much. But in this one, they lost about 3/4 of their army. Supply captured substantial. Over 250,000 weapons cost captured. The only downside is because I think we're going to be going back to the Eastern Theater. We won't get to take advantage of that because we're going to upgrade these units and we won't see them again for a year. I don't think the next major battle in the Western Theater is until 1863, or at least late 1862 in terms of the game. Massive edge in victory points from hexes and total domination in total victory points. So now we have to make a choice, folks. We can choose to start going toward Vicksburg, which is the flotilla of Union troops kind of going down toward the Vicksburg naval action. We can choose Stones River, so it'll jump us ahead to 1863. The critical one of the war began with the costly but inconclusive Battle of Stones River near Murfreesboro in western Tennessee, so we'd probably see some of the same forces involved here as at Shiloh. And then we can go to Seven Pines. So although the Confederates sustained higher casualties in this poorly executed battle, including General Joseph Johnston, who was badly wounded, the action redoubled General McClellan's natural caution. So this would bring us to the Peninsula Campaign. We've got to make a choice, folks. Do we stay in the west and go to Stones River? Do we go to the east and battle in the Peninsula Campaign? Or do we go to Vicksburg and try and get past and start that siege? What do you guys want to do? You guys want to do Vicksburg? Really? You want to avoid all the Eastern Theater battles? If we do Seven Pines, we get pulled right into the 7 days battles, and we'll have like 6 scenarios all in quick succession. Oh, it's a close one. I don't think I've done the Vicksburg naval action, but I suck. And the nice thing is, with the 7 days, you will get to see naval battles in a little bit. Alright guys, we're going Seven Pines. It's a pretty even split down the board in terms of the votes, but we're going to do Seven Pines. Plus, I think we can end up in Vicksburg anyway, even if we go this route. It's not necessarily because Vicksburg happened so much later in the war, we could end up winding our way back. I think the Seven Pines option gives us the most potential battles for this campaign. But you can see Field Hospital, we lost J.S. Cavender. He died in combat. Meanwhile, there were some promotions. A.M.C.D. McCook promoted to Brigadier General. C.S. Hayes to Lieutenant Colonel. Thubar, a artillery gentleman, promoted to captain. Cavalry Brigade promoted to major, and McCullough promoted to colonel. In addition, Major J.S. Cavender of Cavender's battalion suffered a mortal wound while courageously leading his troops in battle. His unit is now led by Captain H. Richardson. Captain H. Richardson has been transferred to take command of Cavender's battalion, which will now be known as Richardson's battalion. Okay, so that's an artillery piece. Now we're going to go in, and we've got $250,000 to refit our troops. Unfortunately, you guys, I don't believe we can carry this money over. Otherwise, I'd say screw it. Let's just bring it to the east with us. But since we can't do that, I think what we're going to do is we're just going to make sure that all of our troops at least have 1822 weapons first. Actually, the artillery, I want to get them into either ordnance or Napoleons. I think we'll go with ordnance rifles. I really like the Napoleon, actually. Let's go into Napoleon. Okay. So it's gonna be a little bit tedious getting through and making sure everybody has at least that bare minimum that I said. 6-inch gun sucks, by the way, or 6-pound gun, or whatever it is. Man, a lot of our artillery is terrible. The range on the Napoleon is short, so that's not ideal, but if you get your artillery up and close with the enemy, boy, does it wipe fields of fire open. Doesn't look like we have any more Napoleons available, so we could go with the 10-pound Parrott rifle. I always thought the 3-inch ordnance was one of the best artillery pieces in the war. The Parrott had a bad tendency to blow up, but the game seems to prefer the Parrott over the ordnance. Okay. Okay, so these guys need to at least upgrade to here. Oh wow, it's a small unit. We could probably upgrade them to damn good weapons relatively, well, not that cheaply. Let's get them into Lorenzas. You can see we've got a lot of those Austrian weapons there. They're pretty good weapons too, and that doubles their firepower up to something actually useful. Nothing to upgrade on those, and now we gotta look at Buell's force. So again, these guys are using 1809. These are Napoleonic War weaponry right there. You see a huge jump. Again, these guys using the same thing. Huge jumps in firepower when we get them up to that. Really? We're losing. Alright guys, so I appreciate you tuning in thus again in the fourth episode of the Battle of Shiloh, and that's just going to about do it. The next video will be the Battle of Seven Pines, and like I said, I'm going to do more of a historical documentary narration type deal for that particular video, and we'll see how the series goes and how you guys respond, but I'm going to try and get one of these out every week with Civil War Generals 2 in addition to the other stuff I'm doing, so again, I hope you guys enjoyed, and until next time, this is the Historical Gamer saying thank you for watching, and I'm out.